So, long story short, my wedding did not happen. I'll get to the details, but just know. I cut up my wedding dress as I've been sewing for about 15 years and decided to make something fashionable. Well, my mom and sister have words against it. Here's exactly what happened. I need an unbiased opinion on this because I don't know if I'm the a-hole. So, I was supposed to get married 2 months ago to my ex-partner of 5 years. Sadly, we broke it off because he cheated on me on his bachelor party with a stripper. I had this beautiful dress that cost me about $2,000 out of my own pocket. I've been very depressed since everything happened because I felt it was somehow my fault for not being sexy enough or not giving him what he wanted. So last weekend, I decided to, quote, take my power back. And I began altering the dress. I've been sewing for 15 plus years, so I know what I'm doing. I cut it a bit, changed the color to something less wedding-y, and after a week of work, I had a beautiful gown that I could use for anything. The problem comes now. I uploaded the pictures of the dress to Instagram with a caption that said something along the lines of, quote, you can change the worst memories. My sister hits me up and asks me if that was my old wedding dress, and I told her yes. She then called me and asked me why I've done this. I asked her why it was such a big deal. She told me that I could have waited till after her wedding. I was confused. Then she reminded me that when we were staying at the hotel where my wedding was supposed to happen, my mom and sister were there cheering me up, and my sister said something along the lines of, oh, well, if you're not using it, I will. We all laughed, so I thought it was a joke because it was never brought up again. She just asked me once what material it was, so I assumed she wanted something similar. Now my sister's mad at me and my mom says she understands our point of views, but that I could have waited 5 more months till after her wedding to, quote, take my power back. Alright guys, Mr. Reddito here. This story, let me tell ya, that's an intense story. There's an update that I discovered came 5 months after the original post. Guys, this one is something you have to listen to. If you're enjoying this so far, please press that like button and don't forget to subscribe. It seriously helps out the channel. Thank you so much for the support. Here's the update. I posted approximately 5 months ago, but my sister being mad at me for not giving her what was supposed to be my wedding dress. So, after being assured that I did nothing wrong, I decided to try to talk it out with my sister. So, I tried calling her, but she blocked my number. I was very confused and talked to my mother. She was trying to still stay out of it, and I got a little mad and said that it was not fair. That my sister was not right because she never formally asked me. How was I supposed to just guess what she was thinking? She tried to justify her, but in the end also accepted that my sister was wrong. Nonetheless, she told me to just give her space and that she will just come to terms with it herself. Well, I waited a few days till I met her at the supermarket. At first, she tried to act like she did not see me, but I planted myself in front of her. She was just rolling her eyes, saying that she had places to be. And I just said, quote, you know, I hope you notice how unfair you're treating me, and then left her alone. That night, I received a call where I was berated for being selfish for about 20 minutes by her. I asked her if she was done and asked her if we could talk it out like adults. She came over the next night and we had an exhausting fight, screaming, crying, and after all was said and done, she actually apologized for everything. She was kind of jealous of my dress and the wedding I almost had, and she was embarrassed that she could not afford everything I could, and she felt like she failed as an adult and as a mother. Honestly, I get it. Not because I think she's a failure, but because I get how it feels to if your brain tells you you failed at life, because, well, you don't have things that other people have. She apologized also because she was trying to blame me for her problems, and that everything was easier if she was not the one to blame. We talked a lot more until I had to tell her that she did not need a fancy dress and that we could search something basic, and I could help her to decorate it with something. She agreed, and we actually did get it customized in a very basic gown. As we did not have much time, it's not super fancy. Sadly, though, due to the outbreak, the wedding that was supposed to happen this month was canceled. They had a courthouse wedding where she wore one of my dresses and is celebrating in August, if it's possible. Well, guys, that's everything. So even if I was not an a-hole and my sister seemed like a brat, she was dealing with some heavy feelings and I still love her. So as the story continued, before the update, I was thinking, man, this sister's a real jerk for demanding this dress. But after reading the update and realizing the sister was going through some pretty big things at the time, I'm going to have to say I feel pretty neutral on this story, but let me know how you guys feel about it. Drop your thoughts down below as I love reading the comments, and we're going to turn our attention to the final story of the day, and let me just say this right now, this story is wild. It's one of the craziest neighbor disputes I've ever read, and the title is Keeping Me Up at Night with Your Parties? Enjoy being shamed on national news. Here we go, guys. Let's get right to it. In September of 2020, the apartment next to mine was let out to two young women, both students. After they settled in a bit, it turned out they wanted to have a party. No big deal, except Belgium was in full lockdown at this point due to the virus. And you were supposed to only have one fixed visitor over. But then again, to be young, so I didn't really care. During this time, I was working in healthcare. I worked with mentally disabled, but I volunteered for the ad hoc COVID team, meaning I got called upon to tend to those residents who were sick and needed quarantine, or were effectively diagnosed with the virus. This meant pretty long working hours, and I spent about 10 to 11 hours a day at work, with a full hour bike ride to and from work. Needless to say, I was pretty tired almost all the time. So I wasn't looking forward to the noise from a party. But I'm pretty chill, and know that living in the city, some noise is to be expected. So they're having their party, and I can stand some noise and music, but this party was freaking wild. People shouting full on, in the hallway, wrecking things, etc. At about 4 in the morning, I introduced myself to the neighbors and asked them when they could expect, their company of 20 plus people to leave, and if they could refrain from having a party the next day, as I have to work and get up 6 in the a.m. every day. So they promised they would keep it down the rest of the night. They didn't. And they said that they would not have a party the next day. Plot twist, they did have another party, and then another one the day after. At this point, I've been going in full 3 nights without sleep, and was nearing neurosis. Every night I talked to the girls, and every night they would be full of apologies and stuff, but nothing would change. I also felt terrible when I had to enter their place, because, well, it was absolutely packed with people. And I work with some very vulnerable people at work who I would not want to spread viruses to. This was pre-test, pre-vaccines, pretty much of the knowledge we have now. Luckily, the weekend came and they went to their parents and I could recover a bit. Suffice to say, I wasn't really liking my new neighbors. During the next few weeks, they refrained from big parties. But they would have a constant flood of people coming over during the night. And by constant, I mean constant. Like their bell would ring 70 times a night and people would always be coming or going. And those people would always be drunk and loud. Our communal hall is pretty much an echo chamber because it's all stone, and any noise will travel throughout the building. Basically, I could not really sleep all night. It drove me crazy. I could only sleep Friday through Sunday because then they would go off to their parents or wherever. I could not grasp how they could know this many people. that would always be coming and going. During one night while knocking on the door to complain, I encountered my upstairs neighbor, who is also reading this, so hello, and decided that we would have to join forces to get this to stop. My neighbor told me some important information. The reason there were people coming and going all the time was because they used the apartment as a makeshift bar/hangout. During this time, bars were closed due to COVID, and all the students were using the big apartment to hang out. Moreover, across the street was another frat house with 5 boys living there. And that too was a secret hangout spot. So people would hang out in those 2 places and then cross the street if they wanted a different atmosphere, or wanted to see their other friends, etc. The boys from across the street would also come over 15 times a night. Most visitors seemed to be law students or affiliated with them. Basically, our communal hallway was just a part of their cafe space now. So we tried talking to the girls. Then we started to talk to the visitors. None of them had any sympathy for us when we were asking them to please be quiet, it's 4 in the morning. Most of them just laughed at us and said we were pesky neighbors, no doubt. Even more of them were just so wasted they did not even know what they were doing. We started calling the police, dozens of times. Most of the times they were let in and police told us they couldn't do anything. We kept calling and calling as we wanted a record of the calls in the system. Belgium was still in full lockdown at this point, and what they were doing was full-on illegal. Even so, police told us their hands were tied if they would not open the door. When the police could not help, I turned the next best thing. I'm a social worker, and so I have no problems looking up information and calling around to look for help. This is what I do. Most places, student unions, police, town hall, were understanding but could not really do much. So I acted on the suggestion of the upstairs neighbor and contacted one of the girls' deans. I shot him a nice email about sorry to have bothered him and taking up his time, but I had this big group of students from his faculty ganging up every night, and maybe he wanted to know about it since they were breaking every possible COVID rule that existed, especially since me and my neighbor were going to the papers with this story. As a secret lockdown parties were becoming a thing in the paper at this point. This dean called me back right away and we had a nice talk about our problems. He told me he was on it. So basically what he did was call the student girl and her parents. Big drama ensued and we finally got to sit down with the girls and they finally sounded like they were sorry. Tears were shed, for which I had no patience for, to be honest. We learned that the police had actually been inside a few times, and they were issued tickets for having these secret parties. Those are 300 euros a pop, so no idea why they didn't just stop. We learned that they were not happy because the dean called them up at 11 o'clock and they were still asleep. To which I said, well, there's your problem. You're still asleep at 11 o'clock. I'm up at 6 every day and you girls haven't been a bit understanding about that. So, we got to feel a bit like we got our revenge and we got to vent, but we kept it kinda nice and parted in good terms, hoping that this would have been it and we could live together as nice neighbors. But if that were the case, I wouldn't be here, right? Well, you'd think that they would have gotten the point by now and would refrain from making these noises and partying. Well, you'd be wrong. Basically, what they did was they moved to the frat house across the street and started partying there. There were slightly less people running to and from, but the noise was still a problem and we were now in the middle of the second COVID wave. And these people were just meeting up with big groups like crazy while I hadn't seen a soul in almost a year. Never mind the people at my work who were forbidden from even going to their own freaking family. The whole thing was just ridiculous. My upstairs neighbor happened to film such a party across the street and sent the clip to me. We were thinking about going to the press with our story, but we weren't really sure if it would be a good idea. So I posted the clip of the party on the subreddit of our country to test the waters. It got quite some comments and upvotes, and it seemed most people were also sick of people disregarding the rules and having these secret parties. After some talks with the upstairs neighbor, we decided to contact the press and simultaneously go a step up in the university hierarchy and contact the vice rector that had the power to start up a disciplinary case against the students. This person is one of 12 vice rectors for a total campus of about 15,000 students, so quite high up. Things move fast. Local news actually picked up our story from here and contacted me, and we gave some background info. They confirmed with police that cops have been there dozens of times to our address and across the street and weren't let in most of the times. We mentioned that the university was involved and that they hoped that we would finally intervene. The next day, the piece was on their website. I'd say it went viral and got promoted to the sites of most national newspapers. Its headlines was sensational enough, mentioning the dozens of times police had showed up and also mentioning how health care workers were being kept up by selfish students. Yeah. At the same time, the vice rector contacted us to take our statements, which we already prepared on paper, and then informed us that they would investigate and could possibly start up disciplinary acts. At the same time, more reporters were contacting me through the day, and we made sure to mention that to her and the link the university that printed the articles. The next day, while at work, I got a message from the upstairs neighbor that a film crew from the national news was at our doorstep. He declined to talk to them, and I would have done the same since this was getting pretty big now. But they made a segment anyways, and sure enough, that night at 7, here was my street and a short section about cops standing in front of a closed door, and a dozen times the local press cop talking about the troubles of closed doors. Best part about it was that a student from the offending frat house across the street had let the film crew in and said on camera exactly what we were accusing them of towards the university. That they have been having parties and did not let the cops in, and they've done it multiple times. No idea what made him think that was a good idea. Anyways, trying not to make a huge story even longer, the press died down, some talk later, thank goodness, and the disciplinary action from the university went through. Before the hearing, we sat down with the girls from our block and cleared some things up. We wanted to live like normal people together. We tried to make some amends because we put in a good word for them kinda, and they got the lighter end of the stick. 40 hours of community service, probation, but the guys across the street got 80 hours, and each had to write us a letter of apology, which I thoroughly enjoyed reading every time I got one. Sad part is, most of them sounded just like dumb young kids. But that was after getting called out on the news and being part of a disciplinary action. But we never wanted to escalate things this far. Some noise is to be expected when living in the same building, and we were never going to go to these extremes or some little bit of expected noise. But these people went to the extremes and so were forced to do the same. Rest of the year, a simple message on WhatsApp was enough to silence any noise we had coming from their apartment. If anything, I hope they learn that even very polite and chill people can become very upset when presented with a sleep deprivation and excessive noise. So let's go ahead and read some comments. This one stuck out. Was way louder than I was expecting. Quoted from Story. No idea how you tolerated that for a year. I would have burned them at the stake after a week and a couple ignored complaints. Yeah, says comment 2. I thought across the street meant it was the music boombox or some other street, but the students were this loud without it. I shudder to think how loud the girls' apartment across the hallway was. Guys, if you were in this very weird predicament, let me know in the comments down below how you would go about handling it if you were in OP's shoes. I think OP handled it pretty well, but it lasted like a whole year. Alright guys, that's all the content I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and as always, it's cool to be kind. The latest Mr. Reddito producer, Christine Billings. Thank you so much for the support.